Welcome to another video by Farrell's Technology. Today what we want to do is grab an understanding of data macros. They're complex and they're odd as far as regular macros go because they're very focused on getting certain tasks accomplished. So let's go ahead and get started. So to understand data macros, really, you need to understand where to get to it first. You would generally think if you're designing a table, you would go to Design View for the table to attach the macros. But if you look all over this, it is nowhere to be found. The issue here then is that you find it actually by putting it in Datasheet View, and you find it under the table menu. So if you click and go to that table menu, you see them in the upper corner on that ribbon. Now, there's 5 data macros that you can work with. The first one is before data is changed. In other words, it fires off after you've input the information, but before that row gets committed to the database. Before a delete, when you hit that delete key, it evaluates and checks things out before it actually deletes it from the database, just like before change operates. You have an after insert. So the first thing that macro is doing is checking to see if it's a new record or not. If it is a new record, right after you type in all the values, it'll do whatever check you ask for it. Then after update is its cousin, basically. It's an existing record, but you're making a change to that record. So right after you've started to update it, before it commits the update to the database, it will perform the actions that you've asked it to perform. Now, after delete, in other words, as you're deleting, it will then take action after the record is deleted from the database and then performs the functions that you want it to perform. So let's take a look under the hood for each one of these, because the before macros have just a few operations or actions that you can perform. Both before change and before delete, you can only do the same group of events. So you can clear an error, you can trap an error. In other words, we can see the on error message. If there's an error, we can then trap it and do an action. We can raise an error. In other words, if there's a condition that's not really an access error, but a data error based on the information the user is putting in the data, you could then throw up an error message and put information as to an error code and a description that can be trapped by another macro, for example. Then you can set a local variable and you can set a field. In other words, you can actually put a value into a particular record. Now, the after ones have a little bit more flexibility. You can stop a macro. The after actions will also allow you to stop a macro. So after insert, update, and after delete, those are the 3 that we can do after a change is happening. All of those can trap these different changes that you can make. You can cancel a record change. So right after all of these actions are performed, you can then say, well, that didn't meet certain specifications or requirements, and you can then cancel whatever change has been done with the record. You can clear an error just like the before ones. You can delete a record. That's interesting, huh? You can exit for each record. You can log an event, and I'll show you an example of one of those. You can look for errors. In other words, you can trap errors and see the error code and description. You can raise an error. In other words, you can set an error code and a description. You can run another data macro. You can send an email. You can set a value in a field. You can set the local variable. You can also stop all macros. And you can stop the individual macro that's currently running. So besides the actions you can perform, the next level up, kind of in a hierarchy, the next level up are things called data blocks. Now for the before data blocks, there's only one. You can look up a record in any of the before actions. And upon looking up a record for particular information that the user is putting in, you can look up that record and then you can perform any of those data actions based on the record that you've looked up. Now, the after data blocks look a little bit more robust. The data blocks for that are create record, edit record for each record, and look up a record also. Now, you can create a record, and we'll show you an example of that one too, when we create a log entry based on the data being entered into a database, or edited for that matter. So you can do any one of these data actions within any of the four data blocks that are provided. So here's an example of a set field. So we're checking if this particular action is an insert, for example. And before the change is committed to the database, we're going to look and see if the description still says description, because in this case, the description field was filled in with a default value of description. Well, if it still equals description when they're trying to commit the insert, it'll take and set the field to please provide a description. Now, the reason why you would do that is that data macros cannot present a message box to the screen to the user. And since it cannot actually put a message onto the screen, this is one way that you can present it to the user in the form or area that the person is making the data entry. Here's another example. Here's an example of the cost being less than zero. Well, cost is rarely less than zero. If the cost is less than zero, that would be an anomaly. So we're going to edit the record. The alias to that action that's being performed is set cost to zero. So if somebody fat-fingered something, put a negative something in there, we're going to take and use the set field command to take the field cost and set it to zero. And then notice at the end of the if, we have a log event down there, and we can set the description as this is the description for that particular log event. We can also raise an error. This is an after delete command in this case, where we actually set the record number, error number at 5 nines, and the error description, we just called it error and 5 nines. Now, this is not a message box that can be presented to the user, but it is something that another macro can capture and look to see if there was an error raised at the data level and then act upon it in the form. Okay, then we have a set field example here. In this set field example, what we're going to do is look at the product activity. In other words, we're going to look at the information. This one is an insert. We've already determined this is an after insert command. So we already know that it's an insert. So we're going to put the word insert in the product activity. This could be an insert. It could be a delete. It could be an edit, for example. Then we can set the field product ID to the value of the product ID that was just edited. Then we set the other field as the product description. So the new description that the person put in would also be inserted into our activity log. So basically, we've told the type of edit, we've told the product ID that was entered, and we've added the description so that we can have information as to what a user did. If I were writing this, I would also add a date and time field and insert the current date time. I might go ahead and grab the user ID to figure out who the user is and put that in the activity log also. The flexibility at this level is actually quite good, and you could do all of those things. And here's the result of that particular macro and what it did. There were 5 inserts performed. The product IDs were sequential 122 through 126, and they added various things. And then the activity date was also put in. That was actually below the screenshot that I gave you. So basically, a data macro really allows you to have a lot of robust and consistent information throughout your database. Because understand, if you put it at the table level, every time you use that table in a query, in a form, any one of those areas, it's going to collect or make sure the data is continued to be corrected or updated as you put in your data macro every time you use it. So it creates an incredible amount of data consistency. So Hopefully you were able to get something out of this video. If you do, please hit that like button. Let's get it out to more people. Please subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and we'd appreciate you coming back for more. Thank you.